Okay.
Tom, what are the biggest, Tom and Kay, I'm sure you know quite a bit about this as well, obviously. What are the biggest things people are doing wrong that is inhibiting the ability to work for food? And why is it so important to teach the dog to work for their food?
You go first.
Loaded.
I have some. I have
Loaded.
some. So if you say them,
All right, I'll kind of start it off this way, and I'm going to give a little credit out to like the Napopo community because I definitely learned a lot of this from them. Like when I went out to Chicago and saw Pat Stewart.
When did you go out there?
Right before COVID.
It was recent. I was going to say, I remember him
Right before
advertising.
COVID.
Okay, real quick, before we get into that, Patrick Stewart, I don't know much about him, but I've seen his name pop up all the time talking about the Nepopo.
Do you know what Canine Paradigm podcast is?
No.
Okay. Well, the Canine Paradigm, they interview people. Everybody.
Sure.
Like they're really good. They are like they're more of the IACP like central podcast. He's part of that podcast with Glenn Cook, and they're out of Australia.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. So Joe in Florida has told me all the time about. So they're based out of Australia.
Yeah.
Okay. He's told me all the time about them. Yeah, he said it's a wonderful podcast.
It really is enjoyable. I mean, they've had Bart on there like twice. But yeah, like Pat's one of those students from Bart that like really dug into the system and kind of has his variations, which is great to see, right? But essentially, working for food is the concept of like, out in the wild, genetically, dogs, like their ancestors, they weren't like an animal didn't go up to them and just like, die and just say, eat me, It doesn't work out that way. There is a process to where they had to hunt and they had to put all those needs to work. They had to scavenge, put their scent to work and all that kind of stuff. So we could tap into that genetics, and we're really into that whole like biological fulfillment aspect where dogs like, owners aren't doing enough. And where you're talking about like going for the walk, staying in the house and having a backyard isn't a life. Yeah. Right. So, that's where I think it's first off really important because you could have a very simple way to engage with your dog and you could begin to ask them to do things. Okay. Second off, the way a lot of owners are kind of messing this up is either free feeding where they just put the food down and the dog just eats it all in one sitting, or it's just there all day because it's just like a pile of cash. They could just keep picking at it. Right. Mm-hmm. And then there's
the trust fund, baby.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's like, your high value treats where, people are buying these like fancy treats and like stuffing up their dogs with tons of calories and that kind of stuff to get them to do real basic things like, oh, you came in from outside, right?
Yeah.
So, or just like, I'm in the kitchen, let me grab the biscuit and make you sit, right? Yeah. And it's like, first off, like there's a point to obedience. You have to be using it, right?
Sure.
But the idea is you're using their basic energy source to get them to listen to you. Mm-hmm. Like they need to eat. They need that food, right? Mm-hmm. So why don't we use that instead of high quality treats? And, a bowl has up to 300 pieces of kibble at least in it. And that's 300 opportunities to reward your dog for each thing. That's
Is that
like
how many pieces of kibble are in a bowl of food?
I never counted, but
That seemed like a very exact number.
No. I think that's more of like a Pat statement. That's more of like a Pat statement. Okay. Like I'll give him credit that where I just always pulled the 300 because he said that. But again, like that level of reinforcement that you can offer the dog, and it's like. And the nice thing is like during COVID and everybody's home, right, with their dogs, and they're like, I'm having these problems. And it's like, okay, well, you can just begin to ask them to do things. And I think that's the biggest issue is a lot of owners don't reward their dogs like early on for the right choices, right? It's when they become problematic and they're like, oh, I'm going to try to start using food for this situation. And it doesn't work. And then it's like in those situations where like, let's say it's reactivity and stuff, the dog doesn't care about food. Mm-hmm. But if they were working for just basic kibble every day, and then that time where all right, we're going to deal with like your reactivity and I'm trying to get your attention, then the Howie's comes out. That's like $1 versus a $50 bill. And they're like, whoa.
Yeah.
And and again, I kind of have fun with it because, it gives us like a real kind of daily structure kind of thing where it's like, you're constantly working them in everyday life. We're getting dogs come in. Yes, come in. Like I'm saying, like come in from inside and I'll reward you for it. And people are like trying to chase their dogs in their backyard and cornering them and having those big issues where it's like, again, to start rewarding your dog when you ask them to do something. And that's where like work for food really comes into play and it's nice. So, yeah. That's
I
kind of
think you hit it everything.
okay.
That was
I'm
good.
trying to think of anything else.
No, it's really good.
Yeah.
So, you know what's really interesting to me is, so when I go feed my dogs, for example, right? There are almost zero things out there that create more engagement and more excitement than mealtime.
Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah.
Right? Like, and you know, my dogs, obviously, especially since they're not free fed, they don't get treats or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like mealtime is like it, man. They are pumped. They know that routine. They know when I'm getting ready to go feed them, when I go to walk for that gate that goes down into the basement, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so you could look at that degree of engagement, right? That you're able to get out of such a simple task like feeding your dogs.
That you do every day.
That you do every single day with your dog, 2 times a day, sometimes 3 times a day,
Yeah.
right? And then you look at how much people struggle with getting their dog's attention over such minute little bullshit things throughout their day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you look into, like, logically speaking now, like removing dog trainer mind for a minute, like, why can't I achieve that same mindset elsewhere?
Yeah.
Right? Like, why can't I get my dog to come inside to me in a situation like this? And here's the thing. You have the other side of the equation, which is the consequences and the dog understanding. They have to do all of these things, which is another conversation. But the basics of you hit the nail on the head of, like, if you teach your dog to do these things from a young age and you start off with all of the building blocks like this in place, you eliminate 90% of the battle later on because you've spent the time just actually teaching. You know what I mean? And getting the dog to understand all these different types of things, right? And I feel like as somebody, you know, you and I have similar backgrounds when we started in dog training from the standpoint of a lot of motivation, right? Like teaching dogs to really enjoy the process of learning and working. And unless you have that type of, I feel like, kind of experience in the dog training world, you don't realize just how beneficial it can be.
It's insane.
You know what I mean? Like it's unbelievable. That's the one thing I will always put towards, like, you know, a lot of the competitive dog trainers and sport dog world and stuff like that is they get it. They get how to create motivation in a dog. And it's a matter of finding that balance of how do we generalize that to the pet dog world in a way where your day-to-day owner is not going to have to turn into a dog trainer. They're not going to have to do 3 hours of training a day with their dog, but they could still leverage a lot of those same techniques and stuff to their advantage, right?
Yeah.
I had a trainer one time tell me, like, you know, why would you spend all of this time building food drive and quote unquote starving dogs, you know, to get them to develop this food drive when all they want is to be pet? And
I hope that's on camera. It's just like, oh God.
all they want is to be pet. And that's now looking at this from, like, snobby dog trainer, like, giving their 2 cents where it's not warranted, to like actually breaking that down. There is no way on the face of the planet a dog will ever be as motivated by food and that biological need that they have to being scratched on the head.
Exactly. Like, I 100% agree on that.
You know,
point, where
like-
it's just like owners really lose, like, what the reward really is to the dog. And Ivan Balabanov, you know,
Labanov?
yeah,
Is that it? I don't know. I don't know.
I've seen him, and it was hard to either way, like, even after meeting him.
Ivan's out here starting some shit. I don't know if you've been following him.
Yeah, I love it. But you know, he makes and he's like one that's all about motivation. Like, he doesn't work with food. He works with toys because he's like in that sport dog world. But at the end of the day, he makes a good point. Like, dogs determine what the reward is, and if you know,
The
not
dog
you,
decides what's reinforcing or aversive.
Yeah.
Right? In general, right?
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
they 100% decide that, and you have to figure out what's the right way for that particular dog at the time, right? And then, like, another thing where it's like people think you're starving the dog. It doesn't. This way doesn't really work like that too. Like, I really like the concept of how they operate, how working for food operates. It's not so much like, okay, you didn't eat, I'm just waiting till the PM to feed you, right? It's more so like you're running a restaurant. The restaurant's open right now. If the dog drives by and wants to eat, he can come in and eat. But if he doesn't, the restaurant might be closed later.
Yeah.
And then you could kind of keep reapproaching, and like throughout the day, every couple like 20 minutes or up to an hour, and then reoffer it to them. You don't have to starve them, because at some point they're gonna be like, I want to eat.
That's the
right?
beauty of doing it at home
Yeah.
too.
And I think the key with no matter what way you're doing it, whether you're doing like meal in the morning, if you don't eat it, you don't get it. Meal in the evening, if you don't get it, you don't get it, is understanding what the appropriate portion is for the food. I mean, that's the key with it, you know?
Yeah, that's real interesting. I had a client, one of my virtual clients, where they've you know, I was just like, okay, their dog isn't motivated for their kibble and stuff. And she's like, she worked a little bit for the morning. And I'm like, how much are you feeding in a day? And when I saw the dog, I was like, it's a very fit, self-regulated dog.
Yeah.
And like, she was already 2 cups down in this food. Like our dogs, if they're not eating raw, they only need 1 cup because it's like a super rich.
calorie dense.
Yeah. So like that dog already hit its 2 cups for the day, and like then the dog wasn't motivated, and I'm like, that's because the portions
like,
are just.
We're feeding off the bag recommendations. And I'm like,
That's
this is
not
how we
dog food.
calculate calories.
Yeah.
Like we're gonna talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's where Kay comes in fantastic, because like there's sometimes where we find that the dog's not taking their kibble, and we're like, okay, this is weird, and then you figure out like the dog's body doesn't want it because it's not nutritiously value, like there's no nutritional value for the dog when they're when owners bring us like Iams or like really cheap stuff, and then you could tell, and then we give them like a hand. If we use Nature's Logic, real great brand on Chewy, and when you give that to them, they're like, okay, I'll eat, like, and it's like, wow, and that's where we don't think about health either, and that's where Kay is great in that aspect of really attending to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.